This is the decision live by the Fair Work Commission on its annual wage review. So we don't have a figure just yet, but what the Commission does is essentially lays out the argument, lays out the steps and the factors it looked at in order to arrive at this decision. Let's quickly listen in.
Increase in the cost of living and the strengthening of the labour market. At the aggregate level, labour market performance has been particularly strong. The unemployment rate has fallen to 3.9%, compared to 5.5% in April 2021 at the time of the last review. Measures of underemployment have also fallen. The improvement in the labour market is forecast to continue in the period ahead. There has also been a sharp rise in the cost of living since last year's review. At the time of last year's decision, the Consumer Price Index and the underlying measure of inflation both stood at 1.1%. The comparable figures now stand at 5.1% for the CPI and 3.7% for the trimmed mean, or the underlying inflation rate. There is also a marked difference in the inflation forecasts. As the Reserve Bank noted in its May 2022 statement on monetary policy, the outlook for inflation is also materially higher than envisaged 3 months ago. Headline inflation is now expected to peak at around 6% in the second half of this year, partly driven by higher petrol prices and sharp increases in the cost of new dwellings. Trimmed mean inflation is expected to peak at around 4.75%. The sharp rise in inflation impacts business and workers. The cost of business inputs increases, which, depending on the capacity to pass on those costs, adversely impacts profitability. Inflation also erodes the real value of workers' wages and reduces their living standards. The low paid are particularly vulnerable in the context of rising inflation. The non-discretionary components of the CPI, including basic food staples, increased by 6.6% over the year to the March quarter 2022. The increased cost of non-discretionary items will particularly impact low-income households and many low-paid workers. We have concluded that the changes in the economic context weigh in favour of an increase in the national minimum wage and in modern award minimum wages. The level of minimum wage increases proposed by various employer bodies would result in real wage reductions for award-reliant workers, many of whom are low paid. If we were to accept the submissions of some of the employer bodies and award no increase at all, then the real wage reduction would be even more severe. We accept the need for moderation in order to contain the inflationary pressures arising from our decision. The 0.5% increase in the superannuation guarantee rate, the removal of the $450 per month superannuation threshold, and the 2022-23 budget measures are also moderating factors. That said, we are conscious that the low paid are particularly vulnerable in the context of rising inflation. Further, given the sharp rise in the cost of living since last year's review, the increases we awarded last year have resulted in a fall in the real value of the national minimum wage and modern award minimum wages, as shown in Chart 10 in our decision. Taking all the relevant considerations into account, we have decided to award an increase of $40 per week to the national minimum wage, which amounts to an increase of 5.2%. The national minimum wage will be $812.60 per week, or $21.38 per hour. This level of increase will protect the real value of the wages of the lowest paid workers. The proposed national minimum wage and our assessment of all of the other relevant considerations have also led us to award an increase in modern award minimum wages. The present circumstances warrant an approach which gives a greater level of support to the low paid while seeking to contain inflationary pressures. We propose to award a proportionately higher increase to lower paid employees. We propose to increase modern award minimum wages by 4.6%, subject to a minimum increase of $40 per week. In effect, modern award minimum wage rates above $869.60 per week will receive a 4.6% adjustments. Wage rates below that level will be adjusted by $40 per week. In most modern awards, the effect of our decision will be that the 4.6% adjustment will cut in at around the C10 or trade level classification rate, and the flat $40 increase will apply to the lower classifications. We accept that the approach we have adopted will result in some, albeit minor, compression in relativities, but that consideration is to be balanced against the need to provide greater relief to low-paid workers in the context of rising cost of living pressures. Given the current strength of the labour market, the adjustments we propose to make will not have a significant adverse effect on the performance and competitiveness of the national economy. In our view, awarding an increase in modern award minimum wages of the magnitude proposed by ACCER, some 6.5%, and the ACTU, 5.5%, would, in the present economic circumstances, pose a real risk of significant adverse effects to the national economy. We acknowledge that the increases we have determined will mean a real wage cut for some award-reliant employees. This is an issue that can be addressed in subsequent reviews. I now turn to the timing of these increases. Absent exceptional circumstances, the Act provides that variations to a national minimum wage order and to modern award minimum wages are to operate from 1 July in the financial year following the review. We are satisfied that exceptional circumstances exist, such as to warrant a delayed operative date for certain modern awards. These awards are in the aviation, tourism and hospitality sector. The variation determinations in respect of the modern awards on this slide will come into operation on 1 October 2022. In respect of the remaining modern awards, we have not been persuaded that there are exceptional circumstances such as to warrant a delayed operative date in the variation determinations arising from this review. Increases in these awards will operate from 1 July 2022. We acknowledge that that operative date will mean that some businesses covered by these modern awards will face 2 minimum wage increases within a 12-month period. But those businesses have also had the benefit of a delayed operative date arising from last year's decision. We now publish the decision. Draft variation determinations will be published next week. Interested parties will be required to submit any corrections or amendments by no later than 5 p.m. on Friday, 24 June 2022. I want to conclude by expressing the panel's appreciation to the parties who participated in the review for their contributions, and to the staff of the Commission for their assistance. Thank you.